Welcome to the Glasgow Azure User Group. This is Meetup 25, which is just crazy to think about. We are at 25 meetups. But thank you all for your support. We aim to try and be as community-based as possible. So please do let us know if you have ideas for speakers, if you want to speak at an event, if you want topics, anything like that. We're happy to have anybody speak and try and find the topics that you want to hear about as well, speakers around that. Also, if you are thinking about speaking and want to get into that, please do let us know. We are happy to help coach you. We'll either try and mentor you yourself between Gregor and I, Volunteer and Gregor there, but we'll try and help you, or we'll find someone else that can help you as well. So again, please do reach out to us. We are here to be a community resource. Now, for those that don't know who we are, my name is Sarah Lean. I am the organiser alongside Gregor Sutty. We are both here tonight, so if you have any questions, if you want to reach out to us, or you can get a hold of us on Twitter again to give any feedback or any questions, anything like that, please do reach out to us. Now, in terms of how we are going to operate tonight, this community-based group, we do have a code of conduct in place, so please do be friendly and patient to everybody. We hope we are all welcoming to each other. Be respectful and considerate. I think it goes without saying, some of our code of conduct is just kind of common sense, people. So please be on your best behaviour, as we would say. But yeah, hopefully we are all adhering to this code of conduct. And if not, please do reach out to Gregor or myself and we can try and address any of that. Now, we will be having a quiz tonight, and tonight's quiz is a prize of some coffee from a small independent kind of coffee provider based here in Scotland. They are up near Dufftown, so true whisky country, where they are from, and they do these cool little coffee filter bags where it's all the coffee's inside a filter bag. You just hold it over the cup, pour the water in, no fuss. You don't have to grind your own beans, and the bag can be disposed of in your kind of food bin, and obviously the coffee grinds can actually go out in your garden if you wanted to do that. So yeah, we're trying to support some small businesses here in Scotland. So first prize winner of the quiz tonight will win some of their filter bags, so we can organise that. So great wee company to support if you want to have a look. I've got tons of their coffee here, so please do reach out to them. Their website is on screen as well. Reach out to them, order some coffee if you want to try it, if you're not lucky enough to win the quiz prize. So yeah, trying to support these local companies and kind of show our support for them during this time. Now, we are supported by several sponsors, as usual. These sponsors have been great supporters of us since we started our user group back in, I think, 2017. And yeah, they enable us to do the cool things that we do for the user group, both in person and virtually. So again, huge thank you to all of our sponsors who are on screen tonight. I think a few of them are actually here. I think Des is here from Servent. I'm not sure if anybody else is around. I think these virtual events take their tolls. A lot of people are not at them, but again, thank you to their support. Des is in the chat if you want to speak to him. So yeah, I think anybody that wants to reach out to them and chat to them. But again, thank you to our sponsors for helping us be the awesome group that we are and continue to be. In terms of what tonight is, we have seven speakers doing short and quick, snappy presentations from anything from API management to Terraform to Azure Arc, and yeah, whole host of things happening tonight. So definitely going to be fast paced, but hopefully we'll have time to get through all of the content and answer all of the questions and learn what you want. So our seven speakers will be going, and then we'll be having our quiz. So please stay tuned. We have Bart up first tonight as our first presenter, who's going to be talking about Google and Amazon Cloud for the Azure developer. So something a little diverse. Bart, I see you are in the chat. You have presenter mode, hopefully. So if you want to share a presentation, but over to you.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Let's share my screen. So, this is my screen. Well, I have the opportunity to be a developer of Azure for 14. No, I'm a Microsoft developer, but I'm in Azure for 5 years. And recently, I've been looking into AWS and Google, and I'd like to share my learnings on it, because, well, I was hesitated that it would be different, but it's actually most of it is the same. Well, about me, I'm Bart Kooijmans. I'm from the Netherlands. I work as a software engineer. I love speaking about it and sharing my knowledge. And you can reach me at Twitter at Bartolomeo85 if you would like to follow me or send me feedback or anything. So why do I love Azure? I just said I'm a Microsoft developer. I've been in the Microsoft stack for 14 years. I've started in Windows, Microsoft Visual Studio, Microsoft SQL, Microsoft.NET. It's all Microsoft. So when I needed to go to the cloud, Azure seemed to be the logical step. I didn't research it. I just went into the Azure cloud. So I was deep into a tunnel vision. And basically it worked out fine. I didn't have anything that said, why should I look further? And it is a good integration in the Microsoft ecosystem. So for me as a Microsoft fanboy, Azure is the best, right? Why should I look further? And then Amazon came onto my path. As in my spare time, I like to be a external expert at the local university that has people that graduate, and then they need extra people to be independent and be an expert in the well, how do you say that? In the subject that they're presenting on. So there's a graduator from the university, there's a graduator from the company where they actually do the graduation, and there's a third one, that was me. And the first time I said do something with cloud, and it worked out because I had an Azure graduation. And the next time I said, do something with the cloud again. And then they came up with Amazon. And then I had to scratch my head, but that was not what I expected at all. So I needed to look into Amazon. And the first thing I did was look into a lookup table of what is the naming in AWS, what's the naming in Azure, what's the matching in between. Yeah, I found out that it was pretty similar. I was expecting some differences or key takeouts that why should you choose the one over the other. Well, as an introduction, Amazon was founded in 2006 already. That's 15 years ago. Of course, everyone knows, I think, that Amazon started as the bookshop that it is now, and they had lots of data center space that they rented out. And well, I think that has outgrown the official bookstore itself. They have global coverage, and I think that made a new age of software engineering, because previously you had a local software engineer or a local data center at the city nearby, or maybe in your own premise. And now we have very cheap coverage. You can have global coverage, and scaling is very much easier than it was before. All in all, I think by now they have 200 services, and yeah, well, Azure easily matches that. You see that when I switch to the Azure chart, the coverage is basically the same. It's the Western world, if you would like to see it. It's America, Europe, some Western places in Asia, but otherwise, South of America and Africa and Russia is not very much populated in these clouds. But Azure followed along 4 years later. Basically, they did the same as AWS. They started with virtual machines, with messaging as a service and file storage as a service. Initially, not really to make a competitor to the FTP basic website shares. But Microsoft had a great advantage, in that is the popular developer package with Windows, SQL Server, .NET, Visual Studio, like I said, for myself. And that has been a great deal to make it for Azure. And the third big one is Google. They tagged along not too long after that. But Google has a different story, where Amazon and Microsoft tend to please every part in the enterprise world. Google has the initiative of what they build, and they provide what they think is necessary for the world. So in the end, they do have a global coverage, and they do have 200 services or something. But in the end, it's more basic than AWS and Azure. But Google is strong in some niches, like they are good in big data and machine learning because they need that for their own products. They invented Kubernetes, so naturally they have a very big advantage in that as well. And yeah, it's the coverage map is looking very much the same. And then there's each year Gartner, which is a big research institute, they publish something like the quadrant. I don't know who knows about it, but in about every piece of technology, they have a quadrant of technology. And this is about the cloud infrastructure. So the basics of what each cloud is. And each year, Amazon has a stiff lead, and Microsoft is following up. It's basically almost equal to Amazon. Not that, this year Amazon increased the lead a bit more, I see. Google is a great third one, but following widely after Amazon and Microsoft. And then there's even more. You see in these charts, there's Alibaba, Oracle, IBM, but those are nearly not enough. They are scheduled as niche players here, and they don't have all services that the leaders have, like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So they might only have the VMs as a service or only the CRM as a service. So if I look at this way, the size and the footprint seems about the same. They all have a lot of services, global coverage, but how about the domain and services? What do they actually serve? And then, as you might know, as a Microsoft Azure User Group, Azure has lots of services. They even needed to color code and categorize them. And I really love the AzureCharts.com. It is a website that categorizes in compute, databases, networking, and then on top you see the latest things where the latest updates were, and then you see very easily what kind of services there are in each category. But I needed some for Amazon, so I googled ironically for these docs, and eventually I always end up at docs.microsoft.com, and I will share that page in real time because this was the eye opener for me. This is a page, you see a very small scroll bar with every AWS service listed and the counterpart and a description in Azure of what it is. There's also the other way around, and there's also a comparison for GCP for Google. But what this basically is all 200 services are listed here. The Azure counterpart is listed, and what it is. So basically, if you can't make a bad decision. If you choose for Azure, I'd say stick with Azure and do not mix it with AWS, because you can do everything in almost both of them. So there's something at compute. Virtual machines are called elastic compute in Amazon. And there is file storage, there's containers. It's called elastic containers in AWS, but Azure calls it just container instances. And so everything is present in both worlds. And let's go back. In Amazon, they had some fun as well. They made even a bigger categorization. It's a periodic table, which is the same as the AzureCharts.com. It's color coded, it's categorized. If you can't find a way, it's hopefully this helps. And in Google, there's one very nice cheat as well. It's a 4-word cheat sheet. So every service is listed with 4 words. Well, you can't read it, but you can visit it. It says compute, and then all the compute instances of all the compute services in that category is listed on what actually is it, and maybe something what's unique for the one and what's unique for the other. And I'm currently following a Cloud Guru course. I really love a Cloud Guru for cloud courses for GCP because I have a certification as an Azure developer. I went for the certification as a Amazon developer, which was pretty easy if you know the Azure very well, and you just need to find the quirks and the other namings, but basically it's all the same. The principles are basically the same. But like I said before, the Cloud Guru course said it this way: GCP was built from dev towards ops, and AWS and Microsoft were built from ops towards dev. So what that means is that AWS releases almost everything that customer might need, and well, that might be one of their key drivers for their success. And Google has another take for that market, and they have built lots of cool stuff, like how they do machine learning with TensorFlow, or how they handle big data with Bigtable and Spanner, or how they do scaling with Kubernetes, and then they release that into their cloud. And well, basically, AWS is competing with that as well, so they take that as well. But they grow into each other, is what I would like to say. They have a different starting point, but they end up in the middle with basically all the same services. And maybe one is better in one niche or in more mature in the other. But then the next week, the other releases an update, and well, then it's the other way around. Yeah, well, integration is easy as well. So for Azure, you just have a NuGet package, and if you want to code it in .NET with C#, and basically it's a NuGet package. It has a C# interface with, like example, the file storage. You have an upload and a download, and the credentials is like something like a user password or a API key. And with Amazon, it's exactly the same. You have a C# interface in a NuGet package. You state your credentials in the constructor, and then you go with upload and download or connect to the database, which is very cool if you ask me. One of the first things as a consultant, which I am, that was said to me, you need to look into Amazon because the customers are moving towards Amazon AWS because it's cheaper, much cheaper than Azure. In this case, it was about virtual machines. And then I did some study into it. It's actually pretty difficult to make a statement on that because a basic machine with 2 CPUs and 8 gigabytes of memory is 10 cents per hour in Amazon, in Azure, and in Google. It's pretty much the same. So I wouldn't say it's much cheaper. And in the end, if you're a big company, you're ending up with lots of discount. So you're never paying for what's on the price list stated on the websites. Outages is a very big issue as well, but ironically, I couldn't find anything easily about it. You would say they were very proud of how much uptime they got last year or the year before or this year, but I couldn't find anything on it. You can view the news and you can see that a few weeks ago Microsoft had an outage, and in December Google had an outage, but I can never see the proof that they actually reached the 99.99999% of the SLA that they state. So they're very obscure about when there were outages. But on the other hand, if there is an outage, they're almost always open about the post-mortem of what happened. So that could be very learnful. Well, like I did, the certifications match easily as well, which is convenient for me as a consultant. So I have the Azure Developer Associate, and with a few days training, the AWS Developer Associate was very easy to append to it. So I saw that Gregor Sutty was he had his Azure deck completed, so he's now looking into AWS. So he would like to be, yeah, you would like, this is good news for him. And for Google, it's actually the same. So you just learn there is file storage. Which database do I need to use? Is it a NoSQL or a normal SQL? And is there queuing mechanisms? Well, both questions are in all three exams. And then there's the associate level for a few months of experience, and there's the professional or expert levels on for 1 to 3 years experience. They match pretty much as well in all three clouds. So when I started looking into AWS, I had a prejudice about what was unique, why Azure was so good about it, because I'm a fan of Azure. So Azure DevOps, it's good, right? But well, Amazon and Google actually offer that as well. So you can go to GitHub and make an external coupling. But Google and Amazon offer their own Git repositories, CI/CD build systems as well. Well, Windows licenses, what's up with that? Microsoft has an advantage, right? But Amazon and Google offer virtual machines with Windows as well, with good pricing. It's not that Microsoft has an advantage in very much discounts on that. Microsoft SQL is available on AWS, but not on GCP. But well, it shows that AWS is capable of offering that as well. So in the end, if you look at this at it this way, for me, it's all equal. It's very hard to see differences in these clouds. There are niches, like Google is good in machine learning and big data, but in the end, you can better see the whole picture, because then you can make a better offer. For example, in a previous project, we needed to do GPU and machine learning on Azure, and we waited for GPUs to be available, which were very expensive 2 years ago at that time. But we didn't even think about that there would be GPUs available very much at Google's level. And ironically, we used TensorFlow as well, so we could have looked at that way. So yeah, that's a takeaway that I would like to share with you. See the whole picture, and if you're thinking about going to the cloud, consider all the clouds, I would like to say. So that was my presentation. Are there any questions? And if there isn't time now, please reach out to me if you want.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Bart. We do have about 5 minutes kind of Q&A time if anybody wants to ask any questions, or I think there's a few bits and pieces in the chat.
I didn't look into the chat.
That's okay. I think one person was talking about how that statement that AWS says that their virtual machines are cheaper than Amazon, and people were talking about the licensing and stuff, but you actually mentioned that in your
it's just street chatter. It's I don't find any proof on it. Yeah.
I know. I think, to be honest, I think Microsoft make a similar claim, if not something a bit more bolder, where they say that they're, I think, 5 times cheaper than AWS if you run a Windows machine on Azure. But again, you need to get your calculator out and make sure that's actually true for you, and applying all the benefits and stuff like that. So yeah, lots of claims.
You can have more discounted writing good code than with choosing a cloud just to have less costs. I think costs are, you can better invest on better software than another cloud. I think that's the first step you need to do.
Yeah, but yeah, I always say to my customers not to be driven necessarily by cost, because there could be something else you could do and you could be missing out on features if you're just picking the cheapest model. I'm sure we've all been caught out by that. We've bought cheap and had to buy twice. So yeah.
And there's differences on which you can say you are cloud ready, but if you're only using virtual machines, well, what's the difference in using your own data center? So not everyone's cloud definition is the same.
Anybody get any questions for Bart while he's here? I think someone's asking for a link for the conversions between the clouds.
Yeah, it's coming up. I think you mean this one.
Oh, yeah, the name and conversions.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much, Bart. Appreciate that. It was good to have you as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think next up on our agenda is Neil. Neil, I think you were in the chat. Yes, you are. There you
go. I'm here.
Take it away if you're ready.
Okie doke. Let me just share my screen. Right. Okay. I'll try and be quick as I can. Okay. So, yeah, very quick introduction to me. So, my name's Neil McLoughlin. I'm the UK field CTO for a company called Nerdio. I'm based in Manchester and I'm a Microsoft MVP. So very quickly about Nerdio, we do Windows Virtual Desktop. So I appreciate most of you probably infrastructure on this call tonight, but if there are any EUC folks who may get involved with Windows Virtual Desktop, that's essentially what we do over at Nerdio. We do deployment, management, and auto scaling platform. So if you're having issues with deploying Windows Virtual Desktop or just want to manage it easier, give us a look. I won't go too much into this, but yeah. Right. Okay. So where do we go through tonight? So basically, we're going to do a quick introduction, which is just done. So tonight's topic is going to be MSIX App Attach, which is obviously a technology which is quite new. It only went into GA a few weeks ago. So I know a few of you are Azure infrastructure people, but you will probably come across Windows Virtual Desktop at one stage in your career or any projects because it's very interlinked with obviously Azure. It's a sort of Azure integrated service. So hopefully you may learn a thing or two from this presentation. So how did this presentation come about and why am I getting so excited about Windows Virtual Desktop? So this is a bit of a story. On your left, you've got a guy called Jim Moyle, who's a global black belt. And that location is being, I can't remember, I think it's Prague. But anyway, we're having a steak, we're having a conversation where Jim was, this was about 18 months ago, telling me all about where Microsoft is going with the whole Windows Virtual Desktop story. And what got me so excited was he mentioned about all the container stuff. So a lot of you from Azure infrastructure background, you know all about the containers and what they are and how they work and stuff like that. So for Windows Virtual Desktop, they deployed similar technology for the profile containers. So that was called the product called FS Logics. But what they've actually just released is something similar, not exactly the same, but something similar for applications. Okay, so if you think about it as like most people who come from an EUC background, I know some of you may or may not have, know it's very difficult to manage the sort of applications and profiles. So with Windows Virtual Desktop, Microsoft are trying to take that pain away by using those kind of container-like technologies. Okay, so what causes profile IT pros the most pain? Applications, profiles, image management. Okay, they are all very difficult and give people a lot of sleepless nights, right? So Windows Virtual Desktop tries to build and up all that and try and sort of help solve that problem. So previously, some of you may have heard of AppV. AppV is a technology which is very usually widely used in this sort of VDI world. AppV is actually going end of life soon, so end of 2026. AppV will be no more. So AppV is going down, and we have MSIX App Attach is going to be its replacement, hopefully. So other people use Citrix app layering to manage their sort of VDI images. It's very complicated. I've used it in Azure and it's not pretty, so stay away from it if you can. It takes a long time to manage your images doing it, so it kind of defeats the whole object. And obviously in 2018, Microsoft announced MSIX. So just to be clear, MSIX and MSIX App Attach are two kind of separate things, but they kind of build upon each other. So you can employ MSIX onto a physical workstation. MSIX App Attach is what takes that one step further and enables you to build it, use it on Windows Virtual Desktop. Okay, so this is just a very quick feature list. So you need to be running the very latest Windows 10 operating system to use this. It's still kind of going on. So the very latest Windows, like I think it's 20H1 or 20H2, you need to be running that to get all of the features for it. Okay, so if you're thinking about deploying it, please make sure that you're on the very, very latest version of Windows 10. So again, why should we think about using MSIX App Attach if you're going to be using Windows Virtual Desktop? So basically, number one reason is very clean golden images. So if hopefully in the future we can get to a stage where we don't actually have applications installed on our image. Everything's done virtually. I mean, how cool would that be? Because then image management becomes so much easier. Okay, so we've got applications that are assigned dynamically. So again, we can just put someone into an AD group and that's it. They get the application. So you don't have to deploy any software onto the workstations. You can just dynamically assign people to applications. Less management overhead, so you don't have to deploy SCCM servers or AppV servers, all that kind of stuff. Better security, again, because it is essentially containerized, so it's protected from the operating system, essentially, so it's good for security. And future-proof, so MSX is not going away. It may take a while, but it will become the new standard eventually. I estimate it's probably going to take a year or two to become mainstream, maybe longer. Who knows? We'll have to see how it goes. It is brand new technology. And I just mentioned we do some short support costs. So, as I mentioned, imagine a world where you don't have to redeploy your host on a monthly basis. Okay, so every customer I've worked with who deploys Windows Virtual Desktop, keeping the sort of management of the image is the number one problem. Redeploying that to the host and that kind of stuff. So it's really, really difficult. So I'm hoping we're going to get to a stage where that all goes away and redeploying a host, you just go redeploy the host, that's it. You don't have to mess about with the applications. You don't have to do image updates, anything like that. So hopefully MSX is that golden nugget which will give us that information. So downsides, so it's still quite new technology. As I mentioned, it only went into GA with Windows Virtual Desktop a few weeks ago. So not every application is compatible with MSX. I said hopefully over the next coming years, developers will start to deploy MSX in its native format. Obviously, most people are still deploying with the MSI files at the moment. But so at the moment, you probably get around a 40% success rate for deploying it. So just to be clear, when we're deploying MSX, we need to do a conversion. So we have to get an MSI file. We then have to convert that MSI file to the MSX format. And then once we've got it into that format, we then need to do another conversion to get it into a VHD format or VHDX or what they call SimFS file. So it's not pretty. I'm sure it will get better over time. So again, if we get an application that's in native MSX format, that conversion process is a lot easier and a lot quicker. So hopefully we're going to see more sort of application developers natively use that MSX format as well. And there's also something called the package support framework, which increases the success rate. People say around 60%. And if you're still getting problems, there are third-party providers out there who will help you with your application migration. So there's a company called AppCure, who are based in the UK, and they get say up to 90% success rate. So if you've got a project where you need to migrate lots and lots of applications very, very fast, definitely give those guys at AppCure a go, because they've literally converted thousands of applications in very, very quickly. So what do we need for MSIX App Attach? So as mentioned, we just need the latest version of Windows 10. So minimum 2004, ideally 20H1 or 20H2. We need an Azure file share. So the VHDX files needs to be hosted on an Azure file share. Ideally Azure Premium files if you can. But for those bigger environments, you probably need to look at NetApp files as well. So permissions wise, when you deploy Azure files, you obviously get the extra permissions for the storage, file, data, SMB reader, or contributor. So essentially what most people do is for those, they create an AD group and then basically add the users and the computer accounts into the AD group. So it's the users and the computer accounts that need a minimum read access to those VXDX file shares. So that's a very common problem. So if you ever go to deploy it think about that permissions, because that's the number one thing which people tend to get wrong. Also, that Azure files need to be integrated with Active Directory. So you need to AD join that Azure file share. What else is? And obviously, if you're going to use Nerdio, you need version 2.4.0 to manage it as well. So just to be clear, that's the permissions that I was just talking about. So when you deploy the FSLogix, the SMB file share, just make sure the permissions are set correctly. Under the hood, what does it look like? So this is what we've got. We've got an XML file which contains all the information, configuration essentially, what has been deployed for it, and cryptographic hashes. So we'll go to certificates in a second. And yeah, that's it. There's nothing spectacular about it. Packaging applications, I'll skip that. Package support framework. So as I mentioned, if you're struggling, have a look at that. You can Google it and get lots of information from that as well. As mentioned, the storage requirements. So Azure files, if you're running a small to medium sized environment, if you're running tens of thousands of users potentially with lots and lots of applications, have a look at NetApp ANF. These are the IOPS requirements that you need. Obviously, most of you on this call tonight probably know that, but those are the performance differences between Azure files and NetApp files. I won't spend time on that. And so if you want to do the domain join Azure file share, that's just a very quick thing with Nerdio. And storage recommendations. So place the MSIX App Attach file share close to as possible, obviously. So ideally within the same VNet and definitely within the same region. And also do AV scan exclusions as well. Otherwise, you'll have performance issues and locking and lots of strange, weird issues. So make sure you get those right. Certificates are really, really key. So to package an MSIX application, you need to have a certificate. That can be a self-signed certificate for testing only. So if you're deploying it to your users, you ideally need to deploy an enterprise CA, or you can use publicly signed certificates as well. And that's just a very quick PowerShell command, which you run basically just to show you how to create a self-signed certificate, which you want to do that for testing reasons only, as I mentioned. Okay. So I've only got a few minutes left. So what I'll actually do is hints and tips. Yep. So make sure you get your permissions right. As I mentioned, it's really, really critical. Number one tip as well, if you're having problems, just make sure that it works natively. So you can get an MSIX file and just install it directly on Windows 10. So before you go down the road of looking at the sort of WVD stuff, just install it on a blank workstation, make sure that it works okay. Another good tool is a tool called MSIX Hero. That basically enables you to create certificates easier. Enables you to create a VHD to expand the MSIX into as well. So really good tool. Right, so we've got 2 minutes left. So what I'll do, I'll show you what it basically looks like. So here we actually have a MSIX application. So as you can see, installed, we have dirt. So I don't have anything installed apart from Adobe Acrobat Reader. So if I look at my start menu, I can see 7-zip manager and Firefox. So these files are actually held on a file share. So this is my file share, and this is the VHD file, which is held on the file share. So essentially what's happening is Windows 10 is just reading that, and I've actually just deployed that from my Nerdio. So if I launch my Nerdio here, all I've basically done is I've gone here, I've uploaded the image in MSIX format, okay? I pointed it to storage location, which is the file share that we just looked at. I've uploaded the MSIX file, the certificate, okay? And essentially what's happened then is that's loaded that into this format. And then once I've got it in there, I can basically just go into here, into the host pool. And basically I just sign it. I just assign the application to the host pool. Okay, so properties, manage, MSIX App Attach, and app groups, and then just assign it in there. And that makes it available to everyone who logs onto that workstation. Okay, so really, really easy way of doing it. So as you can see, I can go in here and I can launch, say, for example, let's launch 7-bit. As you can see, no performance problems. We launch it straight away. So You can have a single VHD file. You can have multiple applications. So on this one, for example, I've got 3 different applications, and I can reuse that same one amongst my multiple host pools. So to package an application, to get it in a ready state, it probably took me around, I don't know, half an hour. So really, really quick and really, really easy to manage. So again, Notepad++ launches straight away, not a problem. And that's it. I think I'm up for time.
Thanks for that, Neil. That was really helpful. Yeah, has anybody got any questions? Because the MSIX, I can't say that. That's such a too many acronyms, right?
App Attach.
It's pretty cool because I think, like you said, one of the big issues that we've always had is maintaining those gold images and keeping them up to date and, you know, changing them whenever there was a slight change. So this is definitely something that I can see can be very useful for a lot of people.
Definitely.
Is anybody, I'm sure there's a few people in the audience using WVD and stuff like that. Have you ventured into MSIX App Attach, or any questions for Neil? I think we're all going quiet tonight. So you mentioned that there's not everything's quite compatible, I think, to be MSIX App Attached at the moment. Neil, is that right, or
yeah, it's more of the packaging. So obviously you need to convert it into MSX format from MSI or XE or any other format that you've got. So some applications don't package very well, and that's why you have to use these sort of package support framework to get them working properly. As I say, it only went GA a few weeks ago, so it's getting better apparently. So I expect it may take a year or 2 to become mainstream. I think the application compatibility is what puts people off, but if all the applications work, why not use it? Because it works brilliantly. I've tested like 10 applications and they all work for me. So I think most of the popular applications work fine. It's those old legacy applications or complicated applications which you may have problems with.
I think Benjamin had his hand up. Benjamin, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Hiya. Thanks, Neil, for that talk. I actually just put a. Can you hear me here?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I just put a little message in the chat. I saw a news article not long ago with the Microsoft Store because they're using MSIX to deploy the applications through that.
Yep.
And it's not been that popular because publishers have just not been bothered to do it. I know some have like iTunes and Spotify and some other like applications. So. It's just a thing that I found. Microsoft are looking to be deploying standard MSI and EXE applications through the Microsoft Store. So maybe in the future, maybe they'll be doing that, which would be quite interesting. I'm not sure how they'll do it because with MSIX you get the sandboxing and
I guess it depends on the developers. Essentially, they're the ones who are going to drive this. So the more developers are on board, the more popular it will be. So. We'll see. Only time will tell.
It's interesting stuff there. Thank you.
Awesome. Anybody got any other questions? All quiet. A few people saying thank you, Neil. So appreciate that. So thank you for that. I think next up on our lineup tonight is Mert, who's going to be talking about API management, I believe. Mert, are you around? Do you want to take over?
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I am fine, thank you. So let me share my screen. Okay, today I have only one slide. So I am trying to make some live demo and hopefully it will go well. My name is Mert. I am working as a software architect at Finexus and I am Microsoft Azure MVP and Traffic Ambassador. And you can reach me out on Twitter and LinkedIn if you have any questions about Azure or Traffic or any other topic on DevOps or development. And I'll share my browser. Okay. API management service takes more than 15 minutes to create. So I have created my resource before the session. So API management service is a portal that you can manage your APIs, that you can tweak your requests, make some modifications without changing your code base, or you can expose your APIs to your customers, your third-party companies you are working with, and your own developers. And let's have a look at what we have on portal. It has two main points. First one is APIs part. You can define APIs, make some modifications. And second one is developer portal. You can create a portal that your developers can use it to test your APIs. And also it has a cache, built-in cache, but it is not an advanced one. So you can define an external cache. You can see it here and here. You can define a Redis cache for your cache needs. So let's start with API part. Okay, on APIs, you can define a blank API and you can create from a definition, and you can use REST API, that's an open API standard, or you can use WSDL if you have a SOAP API, or WADL definition. Also, you can create from Azure resources such as Logic App, App Service, and Function App. And let's start with creating a blank API. Okay, I will name it blank. Okay, you can also add some other stuff, but I'll use the basic one for this one. Okay, I'll create a blank API. I'll go through all of this soon. Let's add operation, and I'll add an API method. Let's say get stuff. Okay, and you can define headers and other query parameters. And I'll add a response. 200, okay. Now I'm going to add a representation, which means your response sample. Let's say it's okay, and I will add a sample. You can use auto-generate, but I have no backend defined. Let's say okay, now I'm going to save it. Okay, now I can see my front end. I have a get method and stuff, and my response is 200, okay. And you can see some policies here. Before going to policies, I want to test my API. You can test your API definitions in tests without using other tools. Also, you can see a subscription key here. This is a subscription key you need to access this API resource. Let's try it. And I get an internal server because I have no backend defined. Also, you can see it here. Now I want to show you a different policy before defining a backend. Now I'm going to add policy. There are lots of policies. Also, there are other policy definitions that you can use. let's say it's out, and I am going to add a mock response policy. With mock response policy, you can add mocks to your APIs, so you don't need to create mocks on your from your developers. Okay, I created a mock for 200. Okay. Okay, now I have a mock response, and you can see a warning here: mocking is enabled. So you don't confuse if the response comes from mocks or a real backend. Let's try this now. Okay, now I got 200. Okay, and see my representation here. And now let's create an real API, and I add new one, and I am going to use OpenAPI. Okay, let me. Okay. Okay, this is a simple API from Microsoft, and I'm going to use it. And as you can see, when I paste my URL, it automatically creates the display name and name. And let's say URL suffix as conference. Okay, now I have the methods here. And while you are defining policies, you have some layers. For example, I can define policies for all operations, or I can define policies for methods. Let's try to create a policy for all operations. And I'm going to add a policy. And this time I use other policies. Now you can see some XML text for inbound, backend, outbound, and for error one. And I'm going to create a policy, and I hit Ctrl space. It has a very good editor to use, and I'll define check header. Let's say, who are you? And if I failed, it will be 401. And for the error message, I say, I don't know you. Okay, and the actual is, let's say, it's Mert. Okay, now I have a check header policy for all my operations. Let's test it. Okay, I'll send for get sessions. Okay, I get unauthorized error, and it say, I don't know you. Now I am going to define a new policy, but this time I'll use get sessions method only for that method. And I'll add new policy. Again, say other, and inbound. Say this time I'm going to set header. And who are you? And if it exists, I will override it, and let's say it's Mert. Okay. Now I think you expect I will get 200. Okay, but I want to talk about this base. This means the policy comes from the previous layer, which one is all operations, and it runs the previous layer's policy. And after that, it runs this policy. Now I'm going to move up because I want to run this policy before the base, and hit save. I'm going to test. Sometimes it may take a couple of seconds to get your changes. Let's try it now. Okay, I get 200 okay because I overwrite the policy. And let's make another demo for outbound processing. Imagine that you have an API and your response type is JSON, like our demo. But one of your customers say, I want an XML response. I cannot parse JSON response. So the first thing you may do is changing your code or add some proxies, but it will take lots of development cost for you and also tests. Now I'm going to add it as a policy and not going to change anything in my source code. I'm going to add policy and other policies for outbound, say XML to JSON and JSON to XML. Okay, I say you can choose if content type is JSON or always. I'll change it to false because I don't have any header to define that I need to change my type. Okay. Now I've defined a JSON to XML. Let's test it. Okay, now I have XML response. As I said, I didn't change anything on my code, on my server, on my API. Just add a single line and I change my response type. So there are lots of policies that you can define. Let's have a look. And let me show here. For example, you can validate JWT, or you can cache responses. You can limit your call rate and define some code to your policy. And also, you can use transformation policies, add authentication, add some restriction for your security needs. Also, you can have advanced policies like you can look to event hub or set context variable, and also you can add some validation. And this is our development part. And I want to talk about developer portal. Before going to developer portal, you can see the products. Products means is a container that you can put your APIs together. Like you can think it's like a resource group. So you can define some policies to your products. It's another layer for your policies. Developer portal is an portal that your developers can sign up and test your APIs without using this portal. And it is what you see is what you get editor. Okay, you can change anything you want here. Yes. So, or I can add some. Let's add a button. Let's say sign in. I can add some link. For example, sign in. Okay, I can change my appearance and change visibility to authenticated, anonymous, or everyone. Okay, let's remove this one. Also, you can add your custom branding. change navigation, change some title and description settings, or add some keywords. And also you can change your fonts or other settings here. And also it's a good part, let's save it before go there. You can see your page for different devices on form factors page. And I'm going to publish it. Now it's being published. Okay. Now we're going to open a private window. And let me switch to it. Okay, now our developer portal is ready. And as a developer, I create sign in. And to my mail. Okay, I think I entered wrong. Okay. Why it's not going to? Let's try it again. Why it's not? I think it is not working in private window. Let me check my email. Because when you sign up, it sent an email to confirm your account. Okay, and I think I don't think I have enough time to show you the developer portal. And let me go through the other parts. Okay, and for monitoring, you can define application insights here. And also you can define it when you're creating the resource. And also...
Sorry, Mert, we're still seeing your sign-up screen if you're showing something different.
Okay, let me change. Is it okay now?
Yes, I can see the portal now, the Azure portal.
Okay. I think this is my last minute. So let's go through the other parts of APIM. Okay, you can also see your subscription that your developers subscribe from developer portal. You can define names values. This means you can add some name value for you to use your, for example, your common values or secrets that you can use on API management instance. Also, You can use application insights to track your telemetry data. You can use your APIM. Also, you can credit when you create the resource as other Azure resources. And there are lots of things to talk about, but I think my time's up. So any questions?
Thank you for that. There is a few questions in the chat about, let me see. So performing CRUD SQL. Someone's saying I need the app service with .NET Gateway to do that. Is that the best approach?
I need app service .NET Gateway to do that. Is that the best approach? Maybe, but if you need an app service .NET Gateway to do that, it depends on your API. I cannot say it is the best one or there is another approach. So you can reach me out on Teams or Twitter, so we can look at it for detailed, because I don't want to misguide you, because I need more information. Awesome. And I have another question. XML JSON policy transfer response. But how can I store this value to one variable to use later? And if you want to use that response, you cannot set it to variable. But if you are talking about the limit values, I talked before, you can use it to store your variables. But this is on a test page. You cannot get that response and store it anyone. You need to use that policy. But if you don't want to make it every time it's to run, you can use also caching. And I can suggest use Redis cache, because the building cache is, as I said, not an advanced one, and it has for basic needs. So using Redis cache is recommended regarding to the documentation, and also I can recommend to use it.
Awesome. Has anybody got any other questions? All good. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I've never actually looked at the API management, so it was nice to see the interface and the stuff that it was capable of. So thank you for that. I think
thank you very much.
Awesome.
Sorry for the CAPTCHA. I am not a very good CAPTCHA
guy. These things happen, but you know, awesome. Yeah, so thank you for that. I think our next speaker we've got lined up is Chris, who's going to be talking about Hugo and fun stuff and showing us how he can run a website for 20p or something like that.
It's like we've talked about this before. Awesome, thanks Sarah. And hello everyone. Hopefully you can all see my screen okay. If not, please shout and we'll get going here. So as Sarah mentioned, we're going to be talking all about how you can go use Hugo, Azure Storage, or maybe static web apps, and Azure CDN for a really cheap and performant site using Azure. So for those of you who don't know me, quick introduction, Chris Reddington. One of the things I do in my spare time is I run a blog, podcast, vlog type site, which is what really is the basis of this discussion. So if you're interested, cloudwithchris.com. The link is on the top right of the screen there, and you can go ahead, check that out as well. Also on YouTube, Cloud with Chris, and on Twitter, RedOboen, if you want to ask any questions afterwards or get in touch about any of this. So I also work at Microsoft. I'm a cloud solution architect there. And as well as that, I also am an organizer of a local user group as well. So I think we'll be running a similar Lightning Talks event in September if anyone's interested. So again, just get in touch if you want to run something there as well. So before we jump in, just a bit of audience interaction, and feel free to type in the chat here for this one. Would just love to know your experience in terms of static site generators, whether that's Hugo, Jekyll, ViewPress or similar, and with Azure, but focusing on things like storage accounts, CDN and those types of areas, just so I can kind of target the discussion where people are. So feel free to start typing that in the chat window, and we'll keep moving on here. And I'll keep an eye on that. Using Hugo, didn't like Jekyll. Interesting. Thanks for that, Gregor. So I'll keep watching the chat as we go through here. But where I want to start off with this is just a little bit of theory before we dive into the practical side of things. So this really all hangs on a cloud design pattern. And this cloud design pattern is called the static content hosting pattern. And effectively, what this talks about is, why do we need to go and host some static files in something like a Kubernetes cluster or a virtual machine or app service or something similar, if we can host it somewhere cheap, like a storage account that can do the job just as well? That is effectively what the static content hosting pattern is, if we were putting it into real words. So the pattern really is useful in these scenarios where your content is static. The clue is in the name there. So when we think about static content, we're thinking about things like HTML, CSS, images, JavaScript, those kinds of files that ultimately make up our websites. And there's a couple of approaches you can take. You can either have the dynamic aspects of your website on something like a Kubernetes cluster or virtual machine or whatever you're using, and then have the static content in your CDN and your storage. Or if you can have your whole site as a static website, you could have it all in a storage account, all on a CDN, which makes it for a very cheap and performant website, which is what we'll be exploring here. Now, because the content is static in nature and we're not needing to go and do any kind of post-processing when we serve up the content, for example, it's very easy to distribute that content, which makes it a great candidate to have something like a content delivery network. So making it globally accessible for all of our users. So again, we'll cover that in a bit here as well. So just to cover then the flip side, when would you maybe not use this pattern? To be quite honest, if the website that you're building or the platform you're building needs to have some kind of dynamic nature to it. Now, I don't just mean APIs, and we'll cover that a little bit later as well. But really, if when you serve the content back to the end user, you need to do something to it on the way out, that might be a scenario, for example, where you need to go ahead and go for a more traditional server hosting approach. And again, if you are using this alongside some kind of compute platform like a Kubernetes or an app service or something like that, that's great. You can absolutely do that. But what complexity do you then have to go and do to pull those pieces apart? You know, have you got a load of code in your application that you have to start pulling apart, unplugging, spaghetti code there to actually go and get the benefits of that? So is the work worth the reward there? So that's something just to keep in mind as you start thinking about this. So what are the considerations before we start moving into this a bit further here? So first off, the content itself has to be available over HTTP or HTTPS, given we're going to be serving it over, you know, a web protocol of some sort. We need to go ahead and have it publicly available in that sense. Now, if some of that content shouldn't be available to everyone, that doesn't mean this pattern doesn't work. We need to use another cloud architecture pattern at that point called the valet key pattern. So think a bit like shared access signatures in your storage accounts. That is an example of the valet key pattern. So you don't just serve up the content, you need some kind of token that goes alongside it to go and access that content. Ultimately then, the CDN helps us minimize latency and protect that back-end origin from being overwhelmed. So is great from a scalability perspective and building a great user experience for end users. And again, ultimately, we need to think about the complexity of pulling those pieces apart if we're using it with a compute platform, but also the life cycle then of updating those systems. So how do we update the application on the Kubernetes cluster, on the virtual machine, on a web app, and then also push our static assets to the CDN to our storage account and purge the CDN then as well. So some considerations there, but that's really what we'll be working through here in the next 10 minutes or so. But one other piece that I just want to quickly bring up as well here is this pattern, the static content hosting pattern, relates to a modern web development approach or framework that is commonly used here these days. And that is called the Jamstack. So Jamstack, the Jam stands for JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. And that is effectively what these static site generators convert these markdown and these various pieces of content into a website. And this is the holistic term of Jamstack here. So the reason it works so well with this static content hosting approach is because typically we build the content before we actually store it on the storage account or the static content area. So we pre-render the content ahead of time, which is why these types of sites are so efficient and so cost productive here as well. Now, the types of recommended practices or the types of considerations you might see typically come up with these Jamstack sites: entire project on a CDN, which is very similar to what we saw with the static content hosting pattern, using modern build tools, things like being able to chunk up, for example, your content with Babel, or use post-processing engines like PostCSS, for example. Having your automated build pipelines is something you absolutely need to go and do, because managing this as a deployment, and an atomic deployment in particular, is just a lot of hard work and a lot of manual efforts. So why not just go ahead, automate that using things like Azure Pipelines, GitHub, GitLab, Jenkins, and the like to do that instead. Now, because we're serving all of this through a CDN and through a storage account, we need to make sure that we can purge that CDN as quickly as possible, so that when we release the content to end users, it is the latest and greatest. And ultimately, because of the automated deployments and the pipelines there and the release process that we have, everything lives in Git, meaning we can store all of those changes over time as well. And that's exactly how I host cloudwithchris.com. So I use Hugo. There's number of different platforms out there like Jekyll, Gatsby, ViewPress, and others. But go ahead, explore the options, because there's plenty out there. I'm a big fan of Hugo. There's a great open source community that supports it and very welcoming in terms of getting started there as well. So with that, just a bit of context before we dive into the portal here. This is how I build my website. So I've got Azure DNS at the front. I've got a CDN layer then behind that, and I have my different environments as different CDN endpoints there. And behind those then I have the storage account. So that is my origin. That is where my content all lives. So you can see I have a preview environment, I have a staging or a dev environment, and I have a prod environment as well. Now, some of you may be thinking, hold on, you're using storage accounts there. I've heard of this service called Azure Static Web Apps as well. Yes, that is absolutely available. When I built my site, it wasn't available at the time, so it is something I'm looking into and evaluating. But Static Web Apps is still in preview at the moment. But a lot of the DevOps behind what I do for my site is made much simpler and much easier, and all of these different environments that you see on screen as well is simplified by using something like Static Web Apps. So I'd encourage you, if you're intrigued by this kind of pattern and you want to get started, don't just follow the approach that I've done. Take a look at Static Web Apps as well, because could save you a lot of time and effort along the way there. So this is what Sarah was mentioning a moment ago here. This was my Azure bill for last month for my entire site. That includes my dev, my preview, my production, and my podcast files being streamed to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. So £4.20 for the entire month. So a really cost-efficient architecture there. And given all of this is community work and work I do in my spare time, I want to try and keep that cost down as much as possible there. So how does this all work? Well, let's go ahead and create a brand new resource group here. So we're just going to call this the Glasgow Azure User Group. and we're just going to create that in North Europe there for us. And what we'll do is, like most great things, we will go ahead and go to the marketplace and create a storage account. So not going to do anything special here. I'm just going to pretty much take the basics of what we get in terms of settings. We'll just change it to locally redundant because we don't need geo-redundant for the demo. And we'll just create that as is. We won't change any of the basic settings there otherwise. Now, when you create your storage account, one of the options that you have in the Azure portal here is a blade or an option for static websites. You may have glanced over that if you've used storage accounts in the past. And in there, you have an option to turn this functionality on. And what that does is that allows you to serve the content through this HTTP or HTTPS endpoint effectively. So we should see that get created. There we go. And on the left-hand side here, you can see I've got this static website option. If I click enable and then just add an index document for index.html, an error path of that, because that's how my website goes ahead and does that. We'll save that. And what you will now see if I navigate to my blob container is I have this $web container here. There's nothing in it at the moment. So what we'll go and do is we'll switch over to Storage Explorer. We will refresh. And there we go. There's the storage accounts. There's our blob container. Now, normally I wouldn't use the Storage Explorer for this kind of deployment of my website. I would actually go and use something like GitHub. That is what I do for real there. But just to prove what's going on, I'm just going to go ahead, copy a load of files that I had from one of my previous website deployments. You can see all it's doing is literally just copying a load of static assets here. So folders, PNGs, HTML files, the like, and that is what gets rendered as my website then. So if we jump back to the portal and we go and take a look at the storage account here, properties, I can go ahead, copy that link, and you can see that I have a website running there. Now, some of the images don't load because I've hard-coded my production URL into that artifact deployment that we just saw. So they're being blocked by my main website in case anyone's trying to pull the content there. But you can see that this is just a website like any other you would go and browse, right? You know, you've got all of the content here. Now, that's all well and good. Oops, we've navigated over to my main site here now. But that's all well and good. But you also want to make sure that you don't just serve directly from that storage account directly. You want to have this content delivery network endpoint in front of that. And again, for two reasons. If you have users geographically distributed across the globe, then you want to make sure they're getting a great experience. Because my storage account here is hosted in North Europe, my users in the United States, in Australia, we don't want them to be impacted by latency. We want them to have a great experience. So points of presence distributed around the world for them. And then secondly, protecting that backend storage account, because you do have a limit of how many IOPS that you can put through the storage account at once. So if I had a really successful podcast or episode or blog, for example, I wouldn't want my users to be restrained by the amount of content going into the storage account there. So that's where you can go ahead and use something like a CDN. And again, super, super simple to go and do here. What you've got, for example, if we go and take a look at one of my existing ones here, this is the one we're looking for. So this is my Cloud with Chris CDN. You've got a number of different endpoints. So when you go to www.cloudwithchris.com, you actually go through my CDN. And that is going to a point of presence nearby where you are. You're pulling the content there and getting access to that content. So a really nice, efficient way to keep latency low, costs down, and host your static content there. One final quick thing before we wrap up is we mentioned here about the static web apps as well. I mentioned that static web apps makes all of this really, really super simple. If I go and copy this to the clipboard and open a new tab, what you'll see is this looks exactly like my site once again here, albeit an outdated version. All of this is deployed using GitHub Actions. And if we go and take a look at the source of this, when I create my Azure Static Web App, the workflow file, when I create that resource in Azure, automatically gets deployed to my GitHub repository for me. So I don't need to worry about writing any of that CI/CD and all of these YAML pipelines and all these things. GitHub Static Web Apps can do that automatically for me. And it gives a number of great other benefits like authorization and identity, as well as those different environments and custom domain names. So again, if you're getting started on this journey, we'd definitely encourage you to take a look at static web apps first before jumping straight in to storage accounts and the static website functionality there. So with that, a few pieces to go and look at. Microsoft Learn is a great tool to go and learn more about this type of stuff. So absolutely take a look if you're not aware of Learn already. Hugo has a great website, gohugo.io. Go and check that out. And finally, I talk a lot about this type of content. So again, cloudwithchris.com. I'm on YouTube and I'm on many other platforms as well. So feel free to follow and get in touch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chris. Really good. I think Benjamin just put his hand up. He's got a question. I definitely have a few questions. So Benjamin, do you want to ask first?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Chris. I love your setup, by the way, Chris. It looks great.
Thank
the
you.
Background as well for all the neon signs and stuff. Yeah, I've done something similar myself, and it's been quite successful using blob storage. It costs nothing. It's like 40p a month or something. It's really good.
Yep.
One thing I noticed when I was doing it was, and I noticed your website actually does support this. When you're setting this up, you usually use a DNS for your www.cloudwithchris.com.
Yes.
And I noticed that Azure does not support, static web apps definitely does not support without the www.
Yes.
I looked into documentation and it's really vague. And I'm wondering how you dealt with this. I used Cloudflare, which gives you a free redirect from http cloudwithchris.com to www with Cloud with Chris, and I'm wondering how you did it.
So I've written a blog post about this if you'd like to check it out, because it's actually something that it builds on top of CDN, funnily enough. So you mentioned using Cloudflare. I'm using Azure CDN for that. So if I jump into my Apex domain, because that's what you're talking about there, the naked domain, effectively, what I do in here is I do have a wildcard cert that I have for cloudwithchris.com, which I associate for the HTTPS traffic. But then what I do with the Azure CDN rules engine is anything that's coming in which is not HTTP effectively. Oh, sorry, let me backtrack. Anything that is coming into the Apex domain, so cloudwithchris.com, automatically gets redirected to the HTTPS endpoint of my www. And then there's another trick that I do on my www, which is I force people to use HTTPS. I don't have any HTTP traffic coming in on my site at all, which is this one down here then. So I've solved that using the rules engine in Azure CDN. This is part of the Microsoft standard SKU, and it works brilliantly. But I do call out a few limitations that I encountered along the way in that blog post to do with like character limits of these header values, for example. But overall works really well for that scenario.
Did you pay for the certificate or was it free?
Yeah, I think that one I did pay for, but I've seen some services starting to support the Apex domains. I'm not sure if CDN is one of those yet, though, but I have seen some others start supporting that.
Yeah, I was looking into it myself to try and get like a free SSL. I know Azure does free SSL through the CDN.
Yeah,
but it's
indeed.
Only for the www.
Indeed.
Hence why I use Cloudflare, which gives you basically a free wildcard certificate.
Gotcha.
And the other solutions I saw were using like a cron job, a scheduled task, because Let's Encrypt certificates anywhere for 3 months.
Yes.
It's a bit of a pain to automatically update the certificate, which was a bit of a letdown when I was looking into it. But
gotcha.
Yeah, but thank you for sharing that, and it was a really good demo. Thank you.
Sure.
presentation.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I had some questions around your architecture, because I saw your architecture diagram a few weeks ago, Chris, and with no context behind it. So I was like, okay, why that? I was wondering why you didn't put anything like traffic manager or front door or application gateway in front of it, because you would potentially get like the WAF technologies as well and stuff. Was that a technology choice, or was it a cost choice, or was it this was done a while ago and some of those features maybe weren't there for you, Chris?
Sure. So let's take each of those one by one. So I guess traffic manager and front door. Front door was purely cost, to be quite honest. Like I mentioned, it's a kind of community site in my spare time, so trying to keep the cost down as much as I can. Traffic manager I didn't really have the requirement for, because with the CDN, you can now actually do multiple origins in the back end. So if I've got multiple storage accounts and I'm just serving the same content, I can achieve a very similar scenario to what I would need to achieve with Traffic Manager through here. So Traffic Manager wouldn't really add anything in my architecture there, so didn't really need to consider that one. App Gateway is an interesting one, though, and I guess from my perspective, the content that I'm serving, it's not like I'm getting the content from a backend database or something like that. It is purely all static, and all of the content is available on GitHub. It's all publicly accessible. So there's not like there's anything really that I have to hide or for someone to try and attack on a backend to try and get me. Now, that's not to say that, I haven't taken any consideration of security at all. Like that blog post I just brought up on screen a moment ago, there are some tips and tricks you can do on the CDN side to force the browser to not allow cross-site scripting and some other things there as well. But to be honest, it was really a requirements thing. There's nothing that the WAF in this kind of architecture would add significantly for me for the cost, which is why it wasn't something that I decided to include there.
Cool. No, I was just wondering. Just yeah, my inquisitive mind, whenever I see a Visio diagram, is always to question it.
Rightly so. I'm with you on that. Rightly so.
Awesome. Does anybody have any more questions for Chris before we move on to the next session? Going to take silence as a no. But yeah, thank you for that, Chris. Really appreciate that. Really interesting. Our next session is John, who is going to be talking about Azure resources and Terraform and tags and fun stuff like that. John, do you want to take it away?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to do the screen sharing for a couple of quick slides for a minute. You should be able to see the slide deck. Cool. Thanks so much, Sarah. Appreciate having me on this evening. Whoa. And thank you, PowerPoint. Back into that, shall we? Right. We're going to talk about tags, timestamps for Azure resources and using Terraform. So this is one of the things that is a bugbear of mine, is when was something created? Many of the cloud resources do not have that as a property. So that's what we're going to look at here. Who am I? I'm John. I'm a data platform MVP. Contact details are at the bottom. Feel free to get in touch. Any queries, questions. Happy to talk tech all day. So what and why? Knowing when resources are created is something that is very important. I know as someone who manages database systems, when are objects created? When did table get in place? When did the database get in place? When was things deployed? All of that's important questions that I tend to ask when I'm starting to look for things, or what's changed when I start doing troubleshooting. When we move that sort of mindset to the cloud, it becomes even more important for us, because essentially if something gets deployed, there's also got a cost associated with it. And tags will roll up into billing. So it just gives us another way of sort of cutting that data and say, okay, well, why did my bill change on a particular day? Which resources? How is that sort of going to roll in for me? And also then we start looking, okay, well, let's have a look at some resources. Why is something that was deployed months ago suddenly started costing me a lot more? That type of stuff. And that's really where we're looking at for this course. There's a little bit of troubleshooting, a little bit of sort of investigative capabilities that it will give us. And also it will help us understand why and where we're spending some money, which is really important when we start dealing with cloud resources. enough slides. Look at some code. So just to prove I'm not cheating, here is my nice empty subscription at the moment. Sarah, is the text size all right, that size, or do you want me to make it a little bit larger?
I can see your Visual Studio Code environment okay. Your Azure portal's a bit small, but it depends on what you're demoing there, John.
Let me showing you, here's a resource group and here's
Cool.
some text. So nothing too in depth in there. So when it comes to this, now, one thing I will sort of stress here is that what I'm doing here with Terraform, you can achieve with various other means. So things like Azure Policy, you can get it to punch in tags and so on and so forth as well. So this is just one way to achieve it. I use Terraform because that way, when I'm dealing with multiple customers who've got multiple clouds, so things like GCP, AWS, bits and pieces like that, I've got one uniform way of doing things. I'm a simple creature and too much tends to confuse me. So what are we looking at here? If we just zoom in, the Terraform itself is essentially a cloud platform. It's a platform agnostic way of describing resources, interacting with cloud platforms and some on-premises platforms as well as other things. Very similar to ARM, CloudFormation, that type of thing for our automation of infrastructure. If you're not familiar with it, check it out. It's really, really useful. So essentially, the bit at the top here, ignore pretty much all of this bit. It's basically me just saying, I'm going to be talking to Azure. If I was talking to AWS, I'd be putting the AWS provider information in there. So that gets a little bit more interesting is when we start defining our resource. And in this case, I'm just going to define a resource group that we want to deploy. So I'm saying an Azure resource group. It's going to be called demo. That's just for when I'm referencing internally here within Terraform code. Just literals for the demos for the name. But then we come down to tags. Now I'm only putting one tag in here for the time being. If I was doing this in production, I'd probably have other tags in there as well, like cost center, owner, environment, things like that. But again, for the purpose of this demo, we're just going to be very explicit just to illustrate a point. And what you can see here is I've got a created date tag. Now with that, I'm manually putting in a static value here. So for today's date, depending on the granularity you want to go down to, you can also look at potentially putting time in there. Now, if we're doing interactive deployments, managing and maintain that's going to become a bit of a nightmare. If we're going to move that across to automation using things like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, Bamboo, that type of thing, we could use potentially something like token replacement, so that the pipeline will inject the appropriate date, time, whatever we want when it comes to doing the build. So this is the bit that gives us all of that extra little bit of insight. Now, one of the things is obviously when we start running this code, infrastructure as code, in Terraform's case, we're maintaining state. So if I run this again, and if I'm using, say, an automated platform or I'm using token replacement, that value could change because it's not been set explicitly there at that point in time. This is where I can use the lifecycle block down the bottom here. And essentially what I'm doing is telling Terraform, if the value in created date changes, which it invariably will, when we start looking at some of the other bits, ignore that change. Okay, I don't want that change to count towards whether or not I need to update something, I need to redeploy something, or what have you. So essentially I'm saying, I don't care if this piece changes because I'm expecting it to remain the same. I know when it was deployed, I don't want to update this value, forget about it. If the rest of the stuff changes, then we'll deal with it. So if we just do that, what I'll do is Terraform apply. So I've already initialized the folder structure there. So what I'm going to do is basically tell Terraform to go and apply, which is going to deploy this resource group for me. Maybe. Yes, there we go. We'll deploy all of them and then we'll have a look in the portal again because the portal will take a couple of moments to catch up with the way we're going. So what we've got there is it's gone and deployed that for us. So Terraform has kindly told us what it's going to be doing. Essentially, the ID will know after it's deployed the resource, but where it's going, what it's called, and the tag that we're adding to it, because we've specified that as a literal. Now, that's, like I said, there's a bit of a management overhead associated with that, and that's where Terraform comes into its own, and it's got a little timestamp function for us. So what it means is, that one, we have a look now at the Terraform folder, her file here. Essentially, it's largely the same, but now, instead of the sort of literal value that I'm putting in here. I'm basically saying, okay, well, just give me the timestamp. Now, excuse the sniffing, my hay fever's killing me today. The create date time, the timestamp itself is a UTC value. This is another sort of thing that I like to do is, wherever possible, keep everything in UTC, no matter which time zone you're working in. It becomes especially important in the cloud, in my experience, simply because trying to remember what was deployed by who from which time zone at what point in time, and all those time zone calculations, I've arranged enough meetings to know that they're a real pain and very difficult to do. Everything in UTC, I know where a UTC is, and I can offset that to my time wherever I am at that point in time. Okay. What that'll do is it will just go and pull the UTC timestamp down for us and actually do that at runtime. So when I run the code, when I run the Terraform pipeline, Terraform's owning that for me. So I don't have to remember to inject a value. I don't have to set something up like that and add some extra configuration to my pipeline. So again, if I come back to here, I'll just say Terraform apply. That will go away. It will give us the plan in just a second. And now you can see that we've now also got tags down as known after apply, because we're starting to inject some sort of runtime values into that one. Okay, so if I say yes to that one, that will go away and that will do the deployment for me there, which is all very good, which shouldn't take too long at all. So there we go, that one's done. That's all well and good. Now let's jump over to the portal quickly, see if we've got our 2 resource groups yet. So we've got our first resource group. Let's have a look at that one. And you can see there, I've got my tag. Now, obviously, like I said, those tags and everything will roll up into our billing. So it'll be one of the ways that we can start carving things up, which will make our lives a little bit easier. So very, very useful to do. When we come to look at some stuff in a moment, there's some other things that this can help us with. So if I come back to my resource groups, there we go. Here's our timestamp one. And you can see now we've also got the timestamp component. Now this is all well and good, but I trying to query this. So when we start using some of the Azure CLI functions, the PowerShell functions, things like that, to start going and looking for resources based around tags, if I want to start putting things like created date into the where function, sorry, the where functions, or start searching on where it is equal to something, then it means I've got to do a little bit more complexity in the functionality that I'm doing within my queries, that type of thing. And I'm lazy. So if I come down to my third one, here we go. What we'll do is we'll have a quick look in our final Terraform file. There it is. And what you'll see here is, if I just get rid of those, largely the same, but this time we're actually again now using the format date function, and I'm putting in there the format that I want it, and I'm just going to stick with the date that I'm deploying things. I don't necessarily need to go down to the granularity of time at this point in time, so I'll say take the timestamp but format it like this, and that's a very useful, common format for us to be using. So again, when we start doing things like PowerShell functions to go and hunt things down, we can do that, or we can use string literals, that type of stuff. It makes our life a little bit easier. Now, in addition to this, we're also going to look at deploying a storage account as well, just to give us something to look at in a minute. And again, there I'm just deploying that that tag. Now, ordinarily I'd put something like user locals with variables, that type of thing in there to make that a little bit easier for me to deal with. So, on this last one, let's see what it does. Give it a moment. So this time because we're deploying the storage account, but largely again it's known after apply, as you can see there, because again we're making it driven by the timestamp function, which will be calculated. So there we go. It's going to do that. Have we got any questions so far at all? Let's see the chat window.
None so far, John.
Nothing so far. That's all good. So as I say, ordinarily I'd be putting the tags and everything like this into a separate Terraform file, referencing everything there for us. So there we go. Okay, so refresh. Let's go to resource groups and refresh. Let's see, there we go. So we've got a formatted one. And again, we now got our create date tag back to the date format that we're after. Okay. So that's all well and good. We've got the information we want in here. If we have a look at the resource group, come to it again, we can see there's our storage account. Come into that one, and again we got that there. Now again, like I said, you can do this with Azure Policy, but my preference in this case is to use it to do it in the Terraform, and just means I can carry the same process across multiple clouds if I'm doing that work there. But so why is this going to be useful? So if I just grab my little piece of PowerShell, so one of the things is obviously, well, if something does magically appear, why, where, who deployed it, that type of thing. So one of the things we're going to do here is we'll just have a quick look at grabbing some information from essentially the Azure log. So what this will do is give us some information. Let me just pull it back. I know what it was created. So I know storage account appeared on this date. So I'm going to just use get date minus a couple of hours. So roughly it was deployed in the last couple of hours because whatever. If I was working with say billing team had let me know a day or two later, then I can come in here, I can set a specific date, or I can work between a specific date time window because I've got start time and end time on the get AZ log little commandlet. So if I run that a second, whoa, there we go. We get a whole pile of information coming out, basically related to what was deployed, where and when, that type of thing. But more importantly, I can actually come in here and say, okay, well, it was deployed from my client IP address of 3154.177.94, which I know is the one for my house. And it was deployed by me as the caller. Now, obviously, if that's deployed by a service principal, you're going to get the service principal. Now, that's when you start getting into some additional complexities around understanding when secrets are accessed, who's using what, from where. So if this was Azure DevOps, for example, what information am I going to have in here? How am I going to trace that back? And that's where sort of enhancing things into deeper logging, that type of thing is going to become very, very important for us to look at. But essentially what it does is the more information we put onto tags and the metadata we add into the processes, the more information we have in order to start going around hunting things and explaining, well, John, why did you deploy this? Or what changes did you make to this, essentially, where this particular resource has suddenly, it's been sat there for 3 months and now it's costing me 50, 60 pounds a day, whereas before it was costing me £5 a day. Oh, you've put 10 terabytes worth of storage into it. Okay, now we start looking at that type of thing. So start looking for those anomalies. And that's really just sort of trying to say create date time, or create date time is something that is very useful to add to resources, just simply because for some bizarre reason it's not there by default. Why, I don't know. It's something that I've used an awful lot. So with that, it's been a little bit of a run through, really. But have we got any questions? Anyone want to chat about anything? Any suggestions, thoughts?
Thank you for doing that, John. That was really useful.
Right.
I'm a big fan of tagging things, like you say. It makes it a hell of a lot easier to actually find out why something has changed and what was done, and not to suggest that you want to hit anybody for doing something wrong, but it just makes that traceability there.
Exactly. I mean, I use the tags, as you say. I mean, it's just that extra visibility it gives you and the way it rolls up into things, and it just gives you that extra information. Say, well, I've deployed hundreds of these resources and they're costing me nothing. I mean, do we really need them? Are we using them? That type of thing. They've been sat around for a long time. It's things like other tags as well, getting away from just the pure create date time, is a sort of an automatic deletion. You get a sweeper built into something like the automation accounts. Essentially, you set a tag and say, can this be automatically deleted? So auto purge, yes, boom, once a day, sweeper goes through, purges everything out. So with tagging in general is very, very powerful extra feature feature you can have, but the create date makes our lives a lot easier because we know when something suddenly appeared. I mean, one customer that I've worked with in the past has 17 subscriptions, and they're all managed by different bits and pieces. And the one central building team is, well, where did this come from? Why would we be charged that? When did that appear? It just gives us that information to go and hunt down, and it gives us that stuff that we can then key into the other areas, the logs, and even then looking at the deployment histories in a resource group as well. So if you've got a resource group that was deployed 3 months ago and you've got suddenly a big pile of resources appeared in there, you can start narrowing down in that resource deployment log, and again you'll get a lot more of that information. You get correlation IDs and bits and pieces as well. So awesome. That's cool. Anyway, unless there's any questions, I'll let you get on to the next one.
Awesome. Thank you for that, John.
That's all right. Thank you very much.
So next up is Rob, who's going to be talking about Azure Arc and data services. Rob, take it away.
Hello, hopefully.
Yes, can see you and hear you.
Yeah. Okay, let me just fix that horrible refresh rate. And now I can move. Excellent. Okay, so we want to share a screen. Let's share this screen. So hopefully you're seeing Visual Studio Code.
Yep.
Good. So let's create a managed instance. So first of all, such a good presentation from John. I thought I'd show you one of my tags that I put everywhere. Warning, this resource is controlled by Bicep or Terraform or whatever infrastructure as code you want. If you make any changes, it's going to be overwritten. So don't do that. And here's the link to the repo where you can make changes. So another really useful case for tagging. Saved me a lot. But we'll come to here and let's create a resource. So we'll create a SQL managed instance, and we need to fill in some bits. So we'll pick a resource group. We'll pick a name, put a password in. This is the bit where I need to make sure that I get this right the second time. Okay, let's see. We'll have some networking, some additional things, add in our tags, always add our tags in, and then we'll look at our creates, validation missing. What did I not do? What did we not do over here? Oh, we didn't give it a name. That would be a good idea, isn't it? There we go. Let's have a name. There we go. And once we get to this, we get this message up here. Deploying a managed instance is a long-running operation and can take up to 6 hours to complete. Oh my word, that's terrible. Well, let's do it a bit quicker than that. So we will come to, that's our Bicep deployment. We're going to come to here, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a managed instance in Azure Arc using Azure Arc enabled data services. So this enables you to run what they call evergreen SQL, so always up-to-date SQL. So this is going to be a managed instance running the same SQL engine that will be kept up to date. And we'll pick up some credentials. I keep my credentials using the secret management PowerShell module, and then we'll run this code. Whilst that's running, we'll just have a look and see what it says. So it says, if we can go to there, AZ data, Arc, SQL MI, create, and we give it a name. And the name's going to be Ben AG MIs. And then we say replicas. So we're actually going to build a managed instance with 3 replicas. It's going to have an availability group. I have high availability. I have 3 nodes in my Kubernetes cluster. Next up, we have something that's a bit different. So we've got SCD and SCL. These are my storage classes for my data, the D, and logs, the L. And I'm using Ben's local storage. There's a bit of a joke there, which you can find out about later. And this allows me to choose a type of storage for my data and for my logs. I might want to have really quick storage for my logs, and my data one maybe not quite so much. And then I say I'd like to request 2 CPUs and limit it to 4 CPUs. And I'd like to request 10 gig of RAM and limit to 16 gigabytes of RAM. And that is as simple as it is to run. Let's see how it's doing. Still deploying. Now, the beauty of having this is I am quite happy working on the command line. I don't have any problem here. I can go and work on the command line quite happily. Other people, not so happy. So we can use Azure Data Studio. So it looks exactly the same as Visual Studio Code because it's pretty much exactly the same as Visual Studio Code. And we've got an Azure Arc Controllers tab here, and that comes from an extension that we install. And you can see I've got an Azure Arc Controller, Beard DC. DC stands for Data Controller. It's my data controller. That's the thing that controls all of my Arc-enabled data services. And this allows me to hit my start button and also to show that we're connected to Azure. We're in indirect mode, so we can choose if we want to upload our metrics and our logs to Azure. And we've got a resource called Benji, which is a SQL managed instance. If I click on manage on here, I get an overview of my managed instance. This is just a single node one. You can see I've got a Kibana dashboard and a Grafana dashboard. So I've got my metrics and my logs available to me locally. And I've got some databases. And from Azure Data Studio, I can scale my instance. So I'm able just to say, well, actually, no, I'll change this and I'll just have 1 CPU for this one. This one doesn't need that much. So we'll take this down to, maybe we'll max out at 3. And once I've done that, all I need to do is click this save button. I'm not going to do it because I think it might make this, oh, no, look at this, it's ready. It took 2 minutes and 34 seconds to create my managed instance. So you know what, I will go and do this. I'm going to hit save. And it tells me here that I'm updating my managed instance. I'm scaling it down. So let's have a look and see what we've got in the background. This is Weave. This is my Kubernetes infrastructure looking in a nice visual graphical way. And I've filtered it by my Arc AZ namespace. And you can see that I have got, I can never see them. Ben, there's Benji. So I've got Benji. Benji has got 3 containers. It's got my SQL Server, Arc SQL MI, and a collect D and a Fluent bit to do all the other work in the background. If I look at if I include my storage, thank you very much, you can see that I've got a data class and a logs for these 1 containers. But also, we hide our storage again and we get off of Benji, you can see that I've got Ben AG MI 0, 1, and 2. And they are busy working. Now, I give it a little bit more time to talk because even though it says it's ready, it's not quite ready. So let's connect to our instance. We must first get our endpoints. So AZ data, Arc, SQL, endpoint list, and the name of my managed instance. And it tells me that I've got a managed instance with this endpoint, and this is my dashboard link, and this is my metrics dashboard link, and I've got my readable secondary replica. So I'm going to copy this and put it into my code. And put it into my code. There we go. And then I'm just going to make a connection. I'm going to use DBA Tools because DBA Tools is awesome. And then I'm going to run a query. Say, which pod am I on? I'm on MIS 0. I'm now going to get to my availability group. This is my availability group. You see my availability group's got a name of contained AG, and it tells me what my replicas are. Even more interesting, it also shows me that I've got some availability databases already. I've got 2 of the system availability databases, master and MSD, but they're called contained AG _. Very clever stuff. Nobody quite knows what that means. So let's have a look. We've got a listener. Yep, we've got a listener. And we look at our databases. If we just look at our databases, let's format that as a table. There we go. We've got master, tempdb, and MSDB. No model. We've got our AG databases. We've got our master, our contained AG master, and our contained AG MSDB. We look at our replica. There we are. Put our replica. See all of the different replicas we've got. Now, we've also got a read-only endpoint. So this enables us to give maybe our reporting queries somewhere to look at and say, perhaps we can run this against, this time it's going to get to MIS-1 and not put any load on our primary instance. Now, what I want to be able to do is add a database. But to add a database, I need to add a service to port 1533. This is an admin connection. It's not a DAC like people know for SQL, but it's just an admin connection. And by connecting to that, I've set it up to go to port 311. This means that I'm connected to my primary instance. And if I have a look at my connections, I can see that my connection is 69, which is the bottom one, and the bottom one is using port, go over to there, so we can see it's using port 1533. So this is a special admin port that we've got available. So now that I'm connected to that, one thing I can do is I can copy a backup into the pod using kubectl cp, and then I can use DBA tools and I can just restore my database. How magic is that? That's really cool. Look, database is restored. Let me just check, restore complete true. So everything is good there. Now, if I connect to my instance and I format a table, I've got my AdventureWorks database. But my AdventureWorks database is in simple recovery mode. Thank you very much. So you can see here, recovery model simple. So I cannot add it into my availability group yet. So what I can do then is I'll just set my recovery model into full, and then I'll take a full and a log backup. So I've got a full LSN chain available to me. And then, much as I would love to use the DBA tools commands to add the database to the availability group, I can't do that. What I can do is I can use alter availability group. The name is contained AG, and add the database. And once I do that, if I reconnect, you can see that in my availability group databases, I have got AdventureWorks 2017 and it is synchronized. Okay, we'll prove it. Let's connect to that database. So we can go to our, let's refresh you. Got our Ben AG MIs. We'll grab our endpoint once this is refreshed. Here we go. There's our, oops, let's try that again. There is our endpoint, and now I can just edit this connection and connect to the managed instance. Come on. Don't fail me now. There we go. And I've got my AdventureWorks database, and yes, thank you. That's because you've done that again. And I can There we go. Let's select from employee parent history. So there we go. From nowt, which is a Northern English word meaning nothing, to a managed instance with a database, and bonus scale up and scale down of another managed instance in more or less 10 minutes. Any questions?
That was pretty cool, Rob. I hadn't seen any of that before, so thank you for that. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Has anybody get any questions for Rob? They're all going quiet.
Silence is no. Maybe they're all just blown away by it. Pretty cool, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Rob. Definitely a cool trick to try and speed up that deployment from 6 hours down to, what, 2 minutes? Excellent. If there's no questions, and I'm assuming the silence means you all understood that and have no questions, we can move on to our next session, which is Rishab. Rishab, if you want to take over.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah.
Yes.
Hey, everyone. So let me make sure I'm sharing my screen. Okay, awesome. So yeah, so last year, so a bit about myself. I've been recently getting into a lot of community work, started blogging with the pandemic hitting us. And lately, yeah, I've been exploring a lot of Azure last year and this year. I'm also studying for a few certifications for Azure. So it's an interesting world. So last year for the serverless September event for Microsoft, I had this kind of cool project where I built a resume API with JavaScript and Azure Functions. And yeah, a lot of the recruiters on LinkedIn have been loving it. So let's just dive right into it. So yeah. Earlier in my blog post, I have been using the Functions CLI. I don't know if I'm naming that service right, but there is a CLI version for Azure Functions that you can use to deploy serverless code. But lately, someone from the Functions team made a comment on the blog post saying that, hey, have you tried the Functions extension that comes in VS Code? And I was just amazed how efficient it is. So for today's purposes, I will be using this as to start our project. So let me just choose the new empty directory here. Okay. And for the language, we'll be using JavaScript, and it's a HTTP triggered function. I'll name it as resume, and make sure we have the authorization level set to anonymous. Otherwise, nobody will be able to pull your API endpoint. Yeah, sure. Open in current window. So yeah, so the extension itself generates a boilerplate for you for the function, and basically the main two files that we really care about is the index.js and the function.json. So the index.js exports the function, which will be triggered according to the config that we have in the function.json file. So as you can see, the auth level that we set was asked by the extension itself was anonymous, and then the type is HTTP trigger. And you can also see the there are two main keywords here, the request and the respond, which you can see, or the response, which you can see in the actual index.js here. So if we run this right now, and I think this is the same demo that's on Microsoft Learn. So there's command for the CLI is function start and then the host. And that would give us a locally running Azure function. So if we try to open this in our browser, it says this HTTP triggered function executed successfully. And based on the JavaScript code here, you can pass name. So if we do that, it just says, "Hello, Rishab, that this function has been triggered successfully." So since this is a lightning talk, I'm just gonna utilize the code that's already in here and just modify the response to JSON data. And I used a tool or a utility that's online. It's a standard schema for your resume in JSON. And I'll link that, but basically I have all of this here. So let's copy that. And that looks right. So let me shut down the app. And so if we save that and change the response to JSON data, I think. Yep. Save that again. So now if we run it, it should basically show us our resume data in JSON format, which you can also curl basically through the terminal. And yeah, the other thing that received some feedback was to make this URL shorter. As you can see, it says /API/resume. For that, you can add a property to the host.json in the actual directory, like the root directory of your entire project. I think it's called route prefix. So if you add the route prefix property and set it to blank, save it, run it again, we'll see that it takes out the /API from the endpoint. So now you have whatever your URL is and then /resume. So sure that it works. And the other cool thing that just amazed me about the Azure Functions extension was that you can deploy it to your Azure infrastructure directly from the extension itself. Just make sure you're signed in to the right account. So a globally unique name. Resume, maybe. I'll use Node.js 14. Let's use East US because that's where I'm based out of. So as you can see, it generates the resource group and the function for you, and also the app service, which is just great that you don't have to go into the portal. And I will just wait for the function to be deployed. Any questions so far? I know it's pretty straightforward.
Nothing in the chat at the moment.
Awesome. think this one should be called Resume 2 because I already had one. So it's still doing its magic. Okay, successfully created function app. Awesome. So as you can see, just deploy the function to Azure, and this all was done through the Great Azure extension. And yeah, so you have a working API endpoint for your resume basically, and can hand that out to recruiters, and hopefully they'll be impressed. But yeah, it took a lot of traction in the recruiter world, so that was pretty much it for my demo.
Awesome, thank you for that. Does anybody get any questions or anything at all for Rishab while he's here? They've gone quiet. We've got a quiet bunch this evening. But yeah, thank you so much for that demo. Really appreciate it. We are at the kind of end of our presenters. That's us with the 7 presenters. What I'm going to do now is do the quiz portion of our event. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much to our fabulous speakers, to Gregor for helping me organise tonight's event, for all of you for attending. I really do appreciate everybody that comes along and supports the meetup events, and also thank you to our fabulous sponsors. They have continued to support us even though we are virtual and we unfortunately can't meet in person. We have another meetup scheduled for June. At the moment we're still heading towards a virtual meetup. I think it's a wee bit too early just to decide what's going to happen. Obviously in Scotland here we're still in semi-lockdown as such, but be sure to check out the details for that. We do have Gary Lumsden speaking about Bicep. He's going to be taking us through a whole session on that. So please do check that out. And again, thank you so much for your time tonight, and hopefully catch you again soon. See you, everybody.